You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're listening in to part 2 of a one-to-one conversation between David Longoria of LISC in Phoenix and Ryan Winkle of Rail CDC. They discuss the community work they're doing in Mesa along the light rail line and how they respond to unforeseen outcomes. Stay with us. Today's podcast was produced in partnership with Impact, formerly Railvolution. For a deeper dive on livability issues or to check out the 2023 Impact Transit and Mobility Conference in Phoenix, Arizona, visit impactmobility.org, mpactmobility.org. Today's podcast is brought to you by our wonderful, amazing Patreon supporters. Your support is critical to Talking Headways and Mondays at the Overhead Wire. We really appreciate it. To join this gang of zoning misfits and transportation rabble-rousers, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scarves. Thanks so much to everybody who supports the show, from the bus drivers to the advocates all around the world. That's patreon.com/theoverheadwire. And for more information on our work and where to find our daily newsletter, the transportation scarves, our Cars Are Cholesterol merch, buy books from the authors that join us on the show at our bookshop affiliate site, or find our audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's Town Planning and Practice, check out the show notes on your podcatcher or visit theoverheadwire.com. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the Talking Headways podcast, especially through your podcatchers. With the unfortunate news that Stitcher will stop operations on August 29th, we hope you'll continue to listen on other services. You can find us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Cast, TuneIn, and many, many more. We'll put our RSS feed in the show notes if that helps you make the switch. Thanks again for listening to Talking Headways. We really do appreciate it, especially those of you who keep coming back each and every week.
Hey everyone, I'm David Longoria with LISC Phoenix. We've been talking with Ryan Winkle of Rail CDC, and we've brought the first story up to the opening of the region's first light rail transit line, which was a huge investment connecting the cities of Phoenix and Tempe to the city of Mesa. And in the last episode, we closed with the effort to support small businesses, and we'll pick it up right from there. Ryan, welcome back.
Thank you.
How did businesses do during the construction of light rail? And then what happened to them when the line opened?
So during light rail construction, this whole process of, we had talked earlier how that, the city had agreed to do some sort of payment of their bills during the summer, because obviously the heat and cooling here, the cooling in the summertime is one of the highest expenses. And if they agreed to do, at least 4 small business workshops during the year, as well as, all the monthly kind of merchant meetings and all these different little things, right? And then with NEDCO at the time being the micro lender and kind of leader of this, and then Rail as the Community Development Corporation as the partnership to the CDFI. And so during this time, they felt like they had a lot of support. There was a lot of like family building and this kind of very like friendly, everyone was Norm at the time, and Norm from Cheers, that Norm from Cheers feeling. Yeah. It was very close knit. It felt good. And by the time light rail was ending, everyone was very like relieved. It was like, oh my gosh, yes, we made it. Like we've succeeded. We've lasted through this. Now, like I said, we did lose like about 10 businesses, right? But comparatively to other core corridors, we had, I don't know, probably a little over 100 businesses total in our, like that we worked with in our corridor. So 10 that we knew went out of business, it's less than 10%, right? Other corridors are 30 to 50% business loss. And some of them to this day are still pretty much like war zones, demilitarized zones, right? And so I won't mention where those are, but there are some like that.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so when we gained those 10 businesses during that time too, we felt great. We had a great success. We had a net zero business loss. This is a great success, pointing at the idea that you can plan for this, right? You can plan to keep businesses where they are. You can plan to have small mom and pops that have a lender and some support and some technical assistance. And then you can plan for them to go into the future and be happy in this space, in this place where we all call, our area. But then comes in the developers, and this always becomes that like evil being, the developers and the city, and then that whole thing that you always hear, and there's always the small business. I remember one very specifically. It was a coffee shop, and the developers had come in, they bought many of the buildings from the legacy owners. And now we're like, well, we want to raise our rents. And if you don't want to pay, then that's fine. You can just leave, not a problem. But what I found out later is that it's actually cheaper for them just to house the building than to keep a tenant in it, because then they don't got to do the improvements, all these different things, right? All these things happen. So this one woman at this coffee shop was like, well, like, it's just time for us to sell. And it's time. I'm like, no, you're just falling into the trap. Like, don't do it. Things are going to get really good here really soon. Like, just a few more years. Come on, stay, And they're like, nah, this is a young person's game. And then all those things, right? And the developers, they're just going to take it over anyways. And, that kind of a thing. Right. And so next thing you know, they did sell. And their building was bought by a developer who turned it into sort of a very quiet sort of office building. I don't know what happens there anymore, but it was a really cool old house. It was a coffee shop, It was like, I used to go to there growing up, like as a kid, right? To see cool bands and stuff like that. So now it's along with many other business buildings that were bought during that time that had very decent businesses that could have been to this day existing, but did not because of whatever changes or just not extending their rents. And what that told us was that, man, like I felt responsible. Like, I'm like, we worked so hard to like make this work and like build everybody up, only to really build up the developer's ability to buy a better place for the future for their family or their investors, right? And so that hurt bad, because you're like, dang, like, how could I have done this to my place? You know what I mean? Like, I grew up down the street from this downtown.
It's your home. It's your home. It's your hood. It's like
the people, like, when Betty was selling, I was looking at her face and she just looked so sad. And I'm like, man, Betty, like, that's Betty. And that was, this person, that was that person. Now they're gone. Like, and they had no choice in it. They had zero power. That's why we had changed our total like model of like everything we do has to end in somehow the people staying where they're at and owning and sharing in the wealth of the future. Because while we're in the United States, right? United States, real estate is how you make money. That's like, you buy something, you sell it later for a lot more money, or you rent it or something, right? And so the fact that we hadn't thought about that, to me, was almost like someone just hit me in the face, like, how was I so stupid? You know what I mean? Like, that's when we changed that. So in the meantime, though, like thinking about how that changed to now, though, I was on the board of directors for Rail. I was one of the founders for a long time. And I was kind of taking a little bit of a backseat role at that time. So I was like, I didn't even know how to process that. I mean, it was so sad, because we had thought we won.
Yeah.
And then as kind of time went on and we started getting towards like the pandemic type time, that's when I kind of was like, dang, all right, it's time again. It's time to get back into this game, or like my head back into it at least. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was like a big transition for me. And I think for a lot of folks,
So in describing how you were able to navigate this space during construction and then immediately right after, you mentioned sort of this diverse array of different resources that businesses could take advantage of in order to make sure that they persisted and remained. And I'm curious as to, is this what's missing in so many other places where these type of infrastructure improvements and investments are occurring? Is this the lesson, I guess, or one of the lessons that particularly local governments can take away from this? Is you need to offer a full and diverse, almost like start to finish menu, if you will, of services that businesses and communities can use at their disposal or have at their disposal. And you mentioned a couple of even these other projects that are happening close by. Is that what's missing? Is that what cities and towns are not taking note of?
In an easy way, I would say yes, because that is what they're missing. But once again, is it their job to do that? And would they be good at doing it? Because lots of cities and like other organizations offer small business TA or certain services, right? But I think it's, once again, like I always go back to, it's not what it is, it's like how you're doing it. And so I think people don't understand that it's, once again, to your point, this is not like hey, light rail construction for 3 to 5 years, like that's what it is, and then it's over and it's good, like it really is like that 10-year idea. Because if the idea was in the very beginning of light rail, like, hey, 10 years, what does this place look like? Any real estate professional would have told you, well, what's going to happen is, as soon as light rail goes in construction, everyone's going to try to sell. These people are going to buy it up, and they would have told us the whole sequence. It's not even a secret,
Yeah.
And
Totally.
so I mean, if we would have known that, then what we could have also done is worked with the people who are these legacy owners and like, hey, look, I know you want to make money, I know, but how do we buy as a community, or how do we use this wealth and this like long-standingness that we're getting through the light rail time and toughen it out? How is that rewarded in the future of wealth building for the people that are doing it, or the community in general? Because on top of even that, those businesses being gone, I can almost guarantee you that what will go there will not be another great mom and pop. It'll probably be some chain or something, and then chains are great, they're needed too. But like we've really tried to keep the downtown very unique and original. Like, it is not Anytown USA where you go and you see the Chili's and the whatever. There's none of that. There's none of that there.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point, because it's happening right now, right? We're seeing this redevelopment occur in downtown Mesa. And, you mentioned the developers, right?
Yeah.
But it's not just them, right? It's also the big institutions, right? So like thinking of ASU in this case, who have put a lot of investment into downtown Mesa, and largely because of light rail, right? The opening of the light rail extension into Mesa. And even since then, we've had an additional extension that goes further east, right? So my question is to you is like, between all the developers who are doing like the market rate housing, right, that are building all the market rate housing, or the institutions that are expanding their reach into new places like ASU, how do the local residents connect with these developers and institutions, or other changes in the light rail, like the further extensions of the line? And how do you help facilitate and translate that and connect with folks, or make that connection between folks? What is it like, and where do you fit in? Because you talked about this immense responsibility that you have, and sort of this feeling of almost guilt, if you will, in some of the repercussions or some of the effects that happen. So what were your own lessons, and what did you take from it, and what are you doing now that maybe you didn't take into account before?
One of the things that I think, going back to the idea of when pandemic happened, right? The great thing about the pandemic, and I'm sure a lot of people don't talk about some positives of this time, was the fact that it finally showed the weaknesses that the services already have. That there was always a problem, but it just wasn't so obvious, right? And so when the pandemic happened, everyone's like, wow, like this has always been a problem, but now we really need to address it because we have to, and there's the federal funding coming down, and it's just going places, and we got to do something. In reigniting what we're up to, we had started questioning our own models, right? And so we really brought much more also this like equity, right? The equity lens into it, right? And so when we were kind of gearing up during the pandemic for a lot of the small business work that we were already doing, but started thinking about bigger targets, right? We decided finally to grow up a little bit and get an executive director. This is right before kind of the pandemic time, and really get some grants for some real small business TA, like on our own, our personal. Nedco had gone away. It was just us now. And it was a different time, different place. Light rail had long passed. Businesses had been changing hands a little bit. And now, while the downtown was kind of a little bit on its own because it had been existing for a little bit, the sidelines, like Southside neighborhood, were starting to really feel the effect of the investment from the downtown area. So pandemic came, we had a news director, we had some grants. The city and everyone else and everyone and their mother was putting, like resources into like central areas, right? And downtowns. And we had thought, man, like we could continue our work here, or we could take our amount that we have and really push it to someone who needs it more, right? Yeah. We're like, downtown's cool. They got 20 people trying to do stuff with them. They're fine. And so we started thinking about the Latino businesses, the Spanish-speaking businesses, and how they were accessing the services. So just like back when the light rail was starting and people didn't know how to get these services, and we were the connector piece walking around, the pollinator, walking into businesses, saying things. Once again, we became that, right? But this time we took a much bigger role in actually like going to the developers in the city and saying, like, we want better. We want something better.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, yeah, well, who cares? So does everybody. Like, what do you guys say about that? And we're like, well, we got all these people now, and all this neighborhood right here, they want better too. And then they're like, oh yeah. Forgot the voters. Yeah, the voters. You know, when the voters want something, then it's a little bit different, right? And so I remember the mayor that was really good that brought the light rail. He always told us, he's like, listen, I want to present these ideas, but there are neighborhoods that will fight that idea to the death, right? And they have much bigger spending power and all these different things than you little group over here. So what I need you to do is get the neighborhood together, have them come as a group, and then if you push from the bottom, I'll push from the top, and we can squeeze the middle, and they have to do something, right? It's a friction game. And so we really started really focusing on how do we really empower the people to come and actually be active, on top of us kind of being like stick our head up and take the blow so that the neighborhood could like get the benefit, right? A good example of that would be when all the CARES Act money came out and stuff like that, and the cities were flooded with it. So like, let's just get it out. We only have a short amount of time. Let's get it out, And so we saw it going out to a lot of businesses that already knew how to interact with the city, already knew how to fill out some paperwork, And some of those were the business we've been working with forever on Maine, because we're like, yeah, you know how to do this now. You can do it,
Yeah.
But then there wasn't a Spanish version. And so we're like, and not even that, even if you did speak Spanish and you could fill out the version, what really was the likelihood that you understood what all these small print things meant, that when you got this money or whatever, or how to get the money, or, So during this time of COVID, we were the only psychos that were like legitimately borrowing a building. We set up some tables, some computers, and being face to face with people, of course, with masks, stuff like that, but to get this money to these small businesses. When that happened, we worked with LISC once again. LISC had kind of brokered a deal with the city of Mesa to say, yeah, let us kind of help you do this, and we'll track it. We'll do all the reporting on it, which the city of Mesa is like, oh my God, thank you. Yes, please do it, because this is crazy. It's federal funding. And then so when it all shook out and said and done, when you look at the businesses that got all those services and that extra, those resources, it was all on the west side of Mesa. A ton of them were Spanish-speaking businesses, all in the exact areas that we worked, right? Coincidence? I think not, because we were targeting that, right? It took a very systematic mental approach to say, we're not trying to be like swooping as white saviors here. We're trying to swoop in a place that has said, we need help and nobody's helping us, How do we do it?
So I think it goes without saying that so much of Rail's success and what Rail does differently is behind the fact that it takes time to build trust with folks, and it extracts that trust, as we talked about last time. And we're in this, right, as we also mentioned, for the long game. You unveil it and you support it, and these things sort of cascade, right? It has this effect of sort of rippling out from these small interventions that occur within these communities. And you've also alluded to the fact that folks have the right to be involved, right? But it's also a responsibility or an obligation. And when government does engage,
I got that from Joel Bookman. Ever since he said that one time, teaching me about community organizing in 2013, 2013, and I've kept that statement in my head forever, because I'm like, yeah, it is a responsibility. It's not just a right,
Yeah,
it's a responsibility.
Absolutely. I love Joel. That's awesome. He's been such a great mentor. We could talk about Joel Bookman. Oh my gosh, in another entirely other episode.
Yeah.
Part 3, Joel Bookman.
Yeah.
But okay, so like people have this responsibility, and also that sort of works hand in hand with when governments do get involved, they tend to have the attitude of like, hey, don't you want to do this, right? Help me, like help us help you, right?
Yeah.
And
I have a great example of that's happening right now. If
you talk about it.
A couple of weeks ago, we had gotten a notice from a couple of businesses, had called us up and said, hey, I got this weird letter. Like, what is it? It says something about my sign. I don't know what it is. We've never had anything like this before, This is on Broadway, which is outside neighborhoods, District Latino. I looked at it and Augie, and we're like, oh my gosh, you got a sign code violation. And I'm like, that's so weird because they're about to do construction on Broadway, which is to about the same amount that was happening on Main, during light rail construction. And during light rail construction, they skipped all of the code violations because they knew it was just going to be a hard time for these businesses, right? Yeah. So we're like, what is going on? And then so we call the landlord and we're like, hey, what's going on with this sign code violation? And he's like, yeah, well, here's the deal. When the city sends me these things, like I don't have a choice but to send an eviction letter after they pass the time on that sign code, because then it puts them out of their lease agreement. And then if I don't do that, then the city comes to me to make me do something with it. So it's like the bad consequence or the unintended consequence of the city trying to say like, hey, you know what? Like, why don't you freshen up your sign? In their mind, I'm sure they're just thinking like, like you can clean up your sign, clean up the front a little bit, make it look nice because we're cleaning up around here. But really, what happens is they're going to get kicked out. And so like we were lucky to be able to call this one landlord because we know him. But I was like, how many other landlords are out here that are just going to just issue that warning and say it's a piece? We don't care. We'll get another person.
Totally.
And so we called the city and we're like, hey, like because of this city initiated zoning, like I'm using my words carefully because I had to say, because of your city issued zoning code, violation that you did all up and down Broadway. That's what we found out. It was all up and down Broadway, right? This is happening. And they're like, what? That wasn't us. No, it wasn't us. And then I was like, okay, fine. We played this game before. Like you have an open data portal, you got a grant from Bloomberg. We can look exactly who initiated it right on there. And that says you. So I'm guaranteeing you it's you. And then they're like, oh yeah, well, no, that's not what we meant to happen. And I'm like, no, I know you didn't mean that to happen, but this is what we're talking about before, that the things you do can lead to displacement, Yeah. And so then the councilman got involved. Jen Duff, she's actually been a part of Rail for a long time and actually put a lot of her campaign based on like what she has done through Rail. And she jumped into work and was like, yeah, we need to put a stop on that time on that clock for those businesses, like right now, all of them, all of them. So all of them got stopped as far as like the timing on the code complaint. And then now we're starting to talk to them a little bit about like, what is some sort of sign program like we did on Main Street during light rail look like, because the light rail, what happened is they got an overlay for entertainment. They got an overlay for art and murals. They got an overlay for sign things, all these different things that happened. I'm like, why isn't that happening here? It's the same exact thing you're doing. We're just not getting a light rail, but we're getting totally new construction, Yeah. But that was one time when we had to jump in and of course, like the city, they hate it when we call because they're like, dang it. God, now I got to talk to them again about,
you're doing something right for the neighborhood when the city that you're in hates it when you call. No, seriously, that's like a point of pride, right? I mean, that's almost like a badge of
in
honor.
One way, yes. But also it's like the idea of like attracting more flies with honey is, there's other ways to work. That's what I try to just acknowledge that like they weren't meaning it maliciously. They were just trying to do a job because, construction's happening and they didn't think about it,
Yeah. Well, in your work to not only sort of instill best practices and knowledge for community members, and then also learning from your own lessons, right? And in terms of like what you did well and maybe what challenges you ran into and how you would do things differently, you have generated a lot of really great working knowledge in the neighborhoods and communities that you do the bulk of your work in. And I'm curious, from your point of view, like, how do you leverage that neighborhood knowledge, right? Do you do it for wealth building? Do you do it for ownership? What is the goal as far as Rail's concerned in terms of sort of giving these communities the resources that they need? Because you mentioned earlier, it's like you making money through real estate, right? I mean, the same could be said for small businesses. Like any entrepreneur could say that they want his or her or their business to get to a point where they can sell it and they can retire, right? So like, what does the end look like from Rail's perspective?
Is there an end? I don't know. There isn't an end really, but I think if let's say we're talking about how do we know success happened, right? Let's go there.
Sure.
And so I'll use like a statement that Augie has kind of coined this, but he always says, like, in 10 years, and 10 years is really kind of like, not a real time. It's more of like a time frame that's adequate, right?
Right.
In 10 years, if we look at this whole area that we've been working in, and the wealth has gone up, or the median income has gone up, and the demographics are the same or similar, like, it's still very Latino, then we know we've done a good job, because we've kept like Latino people there. Their wealth has gone up, the median income has gone up, and the neighborhoods look better. We know we did good. But in 10 years, if the neighborhood demographics have changed, and it's like now, white neighborhood or whatever else that might be popular in that area, then, and the wealth has gone up, that means we've imported that wealth and we've exported the people that were there, right? So that's that would be a signal of success for us. I mean, I don't know if that would be like totally, but I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? I mean, that means we just imported the wealth. In some of the neighborhoods, we are currently seeing these houses that are being repaired and flipped, like that flip model. And we call them and we say, like, hey, like, any chance you're going to sell to somebody in the neighborhood? Or, like, what does that look like? Is this like a quick flip, or what's happening here, And we've gotten mixed answers. One woman we had called about the building she was going to sell, and there was a business getting displaced out of it. And we said, well, hey, like what would it take for us to buy the building? She's like, I don't know. Like, I'm actually not going to sell. I'm like, okay, fine. Like a month later, it was sold, and it was sold for like a pretty hefty, like $800,000. And these buildings over here were put there a long, long time ago. So they're not $800,000 buildings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the timing for her was right, and I highly doubt it was her. I bet you it was her kids that were like, no, man, like, we got to get this money for you. And then,
Yeah.
and then it's going to be flipped again, probably the minute that this construction's done, because that's like the cycle of investment, right? And I bet you, I'm willing to bet that what will happen is it'll be the mom who will sell it to the group of kids or the trust or something like that, right? For some amount of money. So then she pulls out the $500,000, right? Or whatever. Then they are going to sell it in a couple more years to some investment group for another set of money that they now pull out the $1 million. And now that person now has it for a while, right?
Yeah.
So the same family is enriched twice, without the community getting 1 cent of that outcome or that wealth,
Yeah. You mentioned, this recent sort of interaction that you had with the city, and even how, like, you mentioned your local representative, Councilwoman Duff, had to get involved and all that. And you're very lucky because you have that relationship, right, with her, and she's been a big supporter and been involved with Rail for a long time. But for folks who maybe don't have that and who want to get more involved and open with their local representatives, right, who they often have to make that case with, right, in order to get what they need. How do they go about doing that, in your opinion? How do you sway a city council person or somebody to side with what they're going along with?
Well, the best time is election years, because I mean, that's mostly true, but not totally true. But let's just say we'll use city council as an example, right? Because
Sure.
There's many other organizations that you have to fight with for things over time, right? But let's just use them as an example. The city, they really don't like it when 20 neighbors come and complain about something, because once that goes into like a public record, then it says, oh, 20 neighbors complained, and what did the city do about it? And then if there's not really a response, that could be now a news story, right? That could grow over time, or something really bad could happen. There's many examples of that right now in mobile home parks, right? Where people have said, man, that place is a dump. Like, you need to do something about it, for 30 years. And now place caught on fire, people got hurt, and now they're forced to like evict everybody, and weird things that happen, right? That's a good example of something like that happens. That happened actually in West Mesa also. But in this case, I used to pass out this little paper, and it was like my kind of my suggestions of people what to do to be civically active. And I'm like, number one, get to know whoever your local representative is, and like just kind of make not like everyday contact, but enough so that when you call, they're like, oh, it's that person, and not in a mean way, more like a, hey, letting you know that this happened or whatever. Thanks for your help, or could you help with anything on this, in a more of an interactive way, right? And then the second thing is you should like get to know your neighbors and like do things with them, not just to like do things, meaning like have little events and things, because that's creating your bond. So now when it comes to the time of talking to that person, you're like, hey, me and 7 of my neighbors all agree and we want this to happen in our neighborhood. How do we do it? Then they're more likely to help you with that, right? They're really more likely to help you if you're registered to vote and all your neighbors are registered to vote. I always say too, get involved in volunteering for something that's in your neighborhood and something that you like. Because a lot of people volunteer one day to feel good. Like they'll go and there's a group here called Feed My Starving Children or something like that, and you go and for one day, like you put these grains in a bag and then it sends it off to Ethiopia and you're like, yeah, I saved 20,000 kids with these grains and, or whatever. And you feel good, but that's not sustainable. Right. So like, if you spent your days like, fixing the fences up and down your neighborhood, that would be pretty sustainable for you. Not only that, if you were the person who did it, every single person in there would be like, hey, that's Ryan, the guy that fixed all the fences. Like, dude's cool. Like, let's help him out if he needs help. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things, like you do these little actions, these little chance actions that will turn into something really big when you need it to happen.
That's awesome. So I sort of want to move into like wrapping up this conversation a little bit, but before I do, I want to talk a little more about like rail, how it operates. You talked at length about what it does, but I want to talk about like sort of the future, right? I mean, and what other folks can take away from the work that you've done here locally over the last, 10 years and counting. Is rail a replicable structure? Is the core idea that it is place-based? Is that the secret sauce? Is there even secret sauce? I mean, how can rails pop up in important communities all around the country?
One of our ideas, I guess, since I took over as executive director, is that we wanted to be decentralized in a way that people that are working with us can make decisions without necessarily having to always like report back or call the boss. I wanted that. And part of that took some pretty deep culturing of anyone that got involved with us, right? So when the people get involved, we make sure they go through a whole like onboarding process and a quote unquote culturing of our ways, right? And our culturing really is like the do it for the neighborhood model, right? Like we do a lot about like everything you do is for the neighborhood. Every relationship you have to remember it's an important relationship, and relationships can be lost like that. So you have to remember we're in a relationship here, And then we usually make them sign something that's the like an equitable engagement contract with us and them, and then the neighborhood they were working with, because they have to understand that everything that happens really belongs to the neighborhood, even include anything that you're taking. Like if I'm like, hey, I'm going to survey everybody, cool, that's great. A lot of people do that. But what happens most of the time is that they leave, they survey. No one ever knows what happened to that surveyor. Whatever information was taken out, and now it's just gone somewhere. And then 200 more people do that. And the neighbor's like, dang, I'm just getting tired of being surveyed for nothing. So then we usually require everyone to pay people that work in the neighborhood if you're going to survey them. All these little things that are saying like, you are responsible to the people in that neighborhood, right? And so that being said, we are setting up multiple kind of decentralized versions of ourselves, even like within like the community organizer Saul, right? Now he kind of understands the model. And now instead of coming to Augie or me all the time, they go to Saul, right? So eventually what I want is like, now Saul should have like a partner or a friend there that is also getting paid to work in the neighborhood. And now it's almost like the little Southside Saul movement is working over there. They're doing their things. I'm over in La Victoria. La Victoria, Anna from La Victoria now is doing her thing. There's all this motion happening where we're not in control of it all. Neighborhood built, neighborhood driven. But we're there to say, hey, like if you need somebody to call the city or write a letter, in a mass sort of way, we're here. So yes. So I think we are slowly becoming replicable. Augie and I and some of the other like people that work more in the group with us, we talk about the decentralized model and what that means. And so like, am I the boss? I don't know. Am I like, is Augie the boss? I mean, sometimes Emily, she's our main small business person, Emily Malave. And sometimes she's very much the boss because I'm like, people say, what's happening with the small business? I'm like, I don't know. I got to talk to Emily about it, because I know kind of mostly what's happening, but there's some things that are happening that she's controlling, And that's a great thing because that also means like, let's say I go away for some reason or, another COVID comes and I'm a casualty of it.
Oh my God, would you stop it? You stop that talk right now,
rail
Ryan
has to
Winkle.
continue.
Stop that.
Rail has to continue, or this idea has to continue, whether it's rail or not,
Yeah. You mentioned being the boss or not. How do you juggle being the leader of an organization like Rail and staying connected? Like, you are incredibly connected. You are all over the place and you have a family. Other than not sleeping at all, I'm convinced you get maybe an hour of sleep a night. But in all reality, like, how do you juggle all of it? Like, what is your secret?
My wife often asks me this because I think, anyone that has, a significant others or, partners that are along with you in the game and they don't work in this kind of work, they definitely are probably often, I'm sure Selena at all the time is like, dude, again, like, don't you have hours? Like, you're 9 to 5, right? Or like, there's often times, this Sunday was one of them when, one of the people that we had doing something couldn't make it. So I had to go, right?
Yeah.
I was there for a couple hours and my wife's like, seriously, on a Sunday? Like, you literally worked at this for almost 10 something years now. Like, can you take Sundays, And I'm like, yes, but responsible to the neighborhood. Remember that, Not only that, like, for someone like my wife or Augie's or any other people's wives or husbands that are into this, one day something will happen and those people will be there for you. I guarantee you, it's already happened many times in my life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the bridges that you build literally end up connecting you to the people who will then come and meet you where you're at when you least expect it, and perhaps when you need it the most. So that's really cool, actually. That's never the motivation, I suppose, but it certainly is a really, I guess, for lack of a better word, a really blessed sort of perk of the work. You know what I mean? It's kind of cool.
Plus, like, think about it. That's happening between all these people too. So now, we got David Martinez, one of the mural guys, working with Scarlett. They didn't know each other before. And Saul building a fence in front of her house when someone walked into their grandmother's house. Like, these are people who didn't know each other before. I'm sure they saw each other in some way, but they didn't like interact,
Well, you very ominously mentioned, like, what happens when you're gone, right? And you're never going anywhere, first of all. So don't even entertain that notion. But how can people dedicated to this work carry it on? How does one generation pass it on to another and lend to it its own vibe, its own flavor, its own character, if you will? Even if you're still around, and you will be.
Yeah.
How do you step back and guide the work forward?
So, right now we have that new operations administrator. We had Evelyn start last year. We actually have 3 organizers now instead of just one of us. It's relieving Augie and I and Emily, who are really the kind of 3 main people originally over time, to do more things, right? And so as that's happened, we've worked hard to, number one, I'm a big firm believer in pay people, pay them on time. You know what I mean? Like, because, and I know that's in the nonprofit world, the amount of money doesn't matter as much as like someone feeling very satisfied and you trying to pay them what they're worth if you can. Secondly, I try to put all the people that are involved with us in a leadership position where I'm like, you tell me what you think we should do. If it's wrong, I'll say no. You know what I mean? But I want you to help me figure this out, because a lot of times I want them to be trained. So I want 20 other me's or other Augies or Emily's or Evelyn's or running around doing things, remember, what was that movie Fight Club, right? When the dude came back and he's like, what are you guys doing? And like, they told us not to tell you. And he's like, but I started this. And then he's like, I know, exactly. They told us not to tell you, Like, I think of it like that, where we got to do something. It has to be, radical enough to create friction and create change, but also good enough where people feel great doing it and they want to continue doing it and they want to be by your side, even if it's like in the interview process, this was awesome. Some guy was like, you know what, like, that's like a pretty steep pay cut, but this is so cool. I'm willing to take that pay cut. You know what I mean? Because I need to be connected again, And I was like, wow, that's a good compliment to us. Thank you,
That's really awesome. Well, Ryan Winkle, I cannot thank you enough for this conversation and for the time and all the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for coming on the Impact podcast and talking to me and fielding these questions and
Well, thank
dropping
you.
some knowledge.
And thanks, Impact. I mean, when I heard you were coming to Arizona, man, I was excited because it's legitimately where a lot of us first went, was that Railvolution, and got our very first taste into this kind of work. And we actually got the assignment from Terry. They said, everyone, Ryan, you're community organizing, Augie, you're this, David, you're that, Jen, you're this. When we come back, everyone needs to take those 3 ideas, and we're going to put at least one of those into motion right when we get back. And that's what we did after everything like that. And that kind of kicked it all off.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Ryan. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, David.
And,
thank you, Impact.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Impact Podcast. I'm David Longoria.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of the Overhead Wire and published first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our generous Patreon supporters for supporting this week's podcast, and you can find out more at patreon.com/theoverheadwire. And sign up for our 17-year-old newsletter by visiting theoverheadwire.com. To get the show each week, follow along at your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, YouTube, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. And if you can't find it there, you can always find its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.